The rusty old bus creaked and rattled as it sped down the uneven country road, surrounded by fields of golden wheat swaying in the breeze. The air inside was heavy, not just with the heat of the afternoon sun, but with the palpable tension between its passengers. In the back corner of the bus, a black woman sat hunched over, clutching her swollen belly, her face glistening with sweat. Her moans pierced the stiff silence, a raw cry of pain and desperation. She was in labor, and no one dared to meet her eyes. The other passengers, all white, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided looking at her entirely, pretending to be engrossed in the passing scenery. Others shot her fleeting glances, their expressions hard with judgment or indifference. The divide in this small southern town was not new, and everyone knew their place. For a black woman to be in this situation, in their presence, was an inconvenience they had no interest in addressing. The woman's groans grew louder, her hands gripping the seat in front of her as another contraction gripped her. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Please. Somebody, help me," she whispered, her voice cracking. No one moved. From the middle of the bus, a soft voice broke the silence. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Heads turned as a young white woman, dressed in a faded floral dress with a baby on her hip and a toddler clinging to her skirt, stood up. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her brown eyes were warm and kind. She was not well off. Her patched dress and worn-out shoes spoke of a life of struggle. But there was a compassion in her gaze that no one else on that bus seemed to possess. I'm not okay," the black woman managed between gasps. The young mother handed her baby to a startled older woman nearby. "Hold her for a second," she said firmly, ignoring the older woman's protests. She moved quickly down the aisle and knelt beside the laboring woman. "My name's Clara. What's your name?" she asked gently. Martha," the woman stammered. "All right, Martha," Clara said, her voice steady. "I'm going to help you, okay? Just breathe. Slow breaths in and out." Clara's calm demeanor cut through Martha's panic. She tried to mimic Clara's breathing, though the pain still racked her body. Clara reached for a handkerchief from her pocket and dabbed at Martha's sweat-covered brow. "Why are you helping her, Clara? You don't even know her," a man near the front of the bus muttered loudly. Clara turned her head sharply. "She's a woman in need. That's all I need to know." The man grumbled, but said nothing more. "Listen, Martha," Clara said, turning back to her. "We're almost to the next town. There's a hospital there. You just have to hang on a little longer." "I'm scared," Martha whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," Clara said, squeezing her hand. "But you're not alone."
"I'm here."
"Well, get through this together." Martha's contractions were coming closer together now, her cries of pain more frequent. Clara kept talking to her, her soothing words a lifeline in the storm of agony. "Where's the father of your baby?" Clara asked gently, trying to distract her. Martha shook her head, tears streaming down her face.
"Gone."
"Left when he found out I was pregnant." Clara's heart ached for her. "You're stronger than you think, Martha. You're bringing a life into this world, and that's no small thing." The bus finally screeched to a halt at the edge of the next town, near a small hospital. Clara didn't wait for anyone else to act. She helped Martha to her feet, supporting her as they made their way off the bus. The other passengers watched in silence, some with pity, others with disdain, but none offered to help. At the hospital, the nurses hesitated when they saw Martha, their faces reflecting the prejudices of the town. But Clara stood firm. "She's in labor. Are you just going to stand there?" she demanded. The urgency in Clara's voice spurred them into action. They brought a wheelchair and whisked Martha away, with Clara following close behind. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity, Martha gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Clara stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. When it was over, Martha looked at her newborn son with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said to Clara, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Clara smiled, her own eyes misty. "You don't have to thank me. You're strong, Martha. You did this." Martha shook her head. No, I wouldn't have made it without you. You saw me when no one else did. Clara reached out and touched Martha's hand. Maybe one day, more people will see what I saw. Until then, we've got to look out for each other. As Clara prepared to leave, Martha called out to her. Clara, wait. Clara turned, her baby now asleep in her arms. Will you be his godmother? Martha asked, her voice trembling with gratitude. Clara's breath caught. She looked at Martha, at the tiny baby in her arms, and nodded. It would be an honor. The bond they formed that day would endure, a testament to the power of kindness in a world that so often chose division. The small apartment was humble, but filled with warmth. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and the scent of lavender lingered in the air. A bassinet stood in the corner of the living room, where Martha's newborn son, Samuel, cooed softly in his sleep. The sun streamed through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. Martha stood in the kitchen, her hands busy kneading dough for bread, a skill her mother had taught her long ago. Despite the struggles she had faced, there was a newfound determination in her eyes. 2 months had passed since Samuel's birth, and in that time, Martha had worked tirelessly to carve out a life for herself and her son in the town. She had managed to secure a small space on Main Street and transformed it into a modest salon. The sign above the door read, Martha's Haven, beauty for all. The words carried weight in a town where division was a way of life. Martha's salon was the only one in town that served both black and white customers. It wasn't just a business. It was her attempt to build a bridge between two worlds that had long been divided. Clara pushed open the door of the salon, a bell jingling to announce her arrival. She held her youngest child in one arm and a basket of fresh produce in the other. Martha? She called out. Martha emerged from the back room, her face lighting up when she saw Clara. Clara, you didn't have to bring all this. Nonsense, Clara said, placing the basket on the counter. You've got enough on your plate. A little help never hurts. Martha smiled gratefully. Thank you. You've done so much for me already. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Clara waved her hand dismissively. You've already repaid me 100 times over by opening this place. It's a brave thing you're doing, Martha. Martha glanced around the salon, her expression a mix of pride and apprehension. It's not been easy. Some folks refuse to step foot in here because of what it stands for. Others come just to cause trouble. Clara frowned. Has anyone hurt you? No, not yet, Martha said, her voice steady. But the whispers, the looks, they're enough to remind me that not everyone wants change. Clara nodded, her gaze softening. Change is never easy. But you're planting a seed, Martha. And one day, it'll grow into something beautiful. Martha hesitated, then gestured toward the chairs near the window. Sit with me for a while. I could use the company. Clara smiled and followed her to the chairs. They sat across from each other, Samuel's bassinet placed between them. Clara leaned forward, her curiosity evident. I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've been wondering. What brought you here? And Samuel's father. Where is he in all this? Martha's expression grew somber. She looked out the window for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to speak, her voice quiet but steady. I grew up in a small village, she said. My family was poor, poorer than most. My mother worked as a maid for the Edwards family. They were wealthy landowners, one of the most powerful families in our town. Clara listened intently, her eyes never leaving Martha's face. My mother would take me to work with her sometimes, Martha continued. I was just a little girl then, running around their big house, staring at things I could only dream of having. That's when I met him, James Edwards. He was their only son, a few years older than me. He used to sneak me treats from the kitchen, tell me stories about faraway places. Her lips curved into a bittersweet smile. We grew up together in a way. As we got older, our friendship turned into something more. James wasn't like the others. He didn't see me as less because of the color of my skin. He loved me for who I was. Clara's eyes softened. That must have been hard, given the town's ways. Martha nodded. It was. His parents were furious when they found out. They threatened to disown him, but he stood his ground. Against all odds, we got married. For a little while, it felt like we had beaten the world. She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands. But life wasn't easy. We were shunned by both sides. The white folks saw me as a stain on their family, and the black folks thought I had betrayed them by marrying James. We couldn't go anywhere without feeling the weight of their judgment. Clara reached out and placed a hand on Martha's. That must have been so lonely for you. It was, Martha admitted, her voice thick with emotion. And then James started to change. The pressure from his family, the ridicule from the town, it wore him down. He began to resent me, even though he never said it out loud. He started spending more time away from home, and when I told him I was pregnant, he left. Clara's heart ached for her.
Martha, I'm so sorry.
Martha shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. I don't blame him entirely. The world was against us from the start. But I won't let Samuel grow up thinking he's less than anyone else. That's why I opened this salon. It's not just for me, it's for him. It's for anyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. Clara squeezed her hand, her admiration evident. You're incredible, Martha. Truly. Samuel's lucky to have you as his mother. Martha smiled through her tears. And I'm lucky to have a friend like you. The two women sat in companionable silence for a while, the sound of Samuel's soft breathing filling the room. Outside, the world was still divided, still full of hatred and prejudice. But inside that little salon, there was hope, a fragile, flickering light that refused to be extinguished. Martha's salon, modest as it was, began to shine like a lighthouse in the darkness of the town's prejudices. At first, her customers trickled in hesitantly. A young black girl wanting her hair braided. A white farmer's wife looking to trim her split ends under the guise of curiosity. Martha treated them all with the same warmth, her smile a shield against the whispers and stares. Word began to spread. Her hands worked magic on hair, but her heart worked magic on people. Her kind words and unwavering resolve planted seeds of curiosity, then respect, in her customers. Slowly, her chairs filled up with people from all walks of life. Mixed-race children who had never been accepted anywhere else found solace in her salon. Black women and white women sat side by side, hesitantly at first, then with growing ease, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet understanding. Martha's business thrived. She began earning enough to replace the second-hand furniture in her apartment with newer pieces. Samuel had a proper crib now, and his little cheeks grew rounder with each passing day. She purchased good clothes for herself and Samuel, clothes that made her feel proud and dignified. She even added a fresh coat of paint to the salon walls, a bright blue that symbolized hope and renewal. But Martha didn't forget the woman who had stood by her when no one else would. Clara, Martha said one afternoon as Clara helped sweep the salon floor. I've been thinking. Clara looked up, her cheeks flushed from the work. About what? You've been helping me so much, even when you didn't have to. I want to make it official. Be my assistant here. I'll pay you properly. Clara's eyes widened. Martha, I don't know what to say. Are you sure? Martha smiled. Of course I'm sure. You've been here for me from the beginning. This salon wouldn't be where it is without you. Clara hesitated, her hands tightening around the broom handle. But want people talk? You know how they are. They'll say all sorts of things if they see me working here. They're already talking, Martha said firmly. Let them. What matters is what we're building here. Clara looked into Martha's eyes, seeing the determination there, and finally nodded.
All right.
I'll do it. From that day on, Clara became Martha's right hand in the salon. She helped manage appointments, clean the shop, and even learned how to braid hair and style it under Martha's patient guidance. The two women made an unstoppable team, and the salon's reputation soared. But not everyone was happy. The whispers in the town grew louder. Women who had once refused to set foot in the salon now openly criticized it. What kind of place is this? One woman sneered in the market. A white woman working for a black woman? It's unnatural. I heard she's trying to stir up trouble, another added. Bringing people together like that. It's not right. The animosity, didn't stay confined to words. One morning, Martha arrived at the salon to find the windows broken and hateful slurs scrawled across the door in red paint. Clara gasped when she saw it. "Oh, Martha." Martha stared at the damage, her jaw clenched. She took a deep breath, then turned to Clara. "We're not stopping. If anything, this means we're doing something right. But what if they come back? What if they hurt you?" Clara asked, fear evident in her voice. "They won't scare me into giving up," Martha said firmly. "This salon isn't just about hair. It's about hope. And I'll fight for it." They cleaned up the mess and opened the salon as usual. Customers came in, some with hesitance, others with defiance in their eyes as if to say, "We won't let them win." One of the regular customers, a mixed-race teenager named Abigail, sat in the chair as Martha styled her curls. "My mama said you're the only one in town who ever made her feel like she belonged," Abigail said softly. Martha's hands paused for a moment, then resumed their work. "Tell your mama she belongs here anytime she wants." Clara glanced at Martha, admiration shining in her eyes. "You're braver than anyone I know, Martha." Martha smiled faintly, but didn't reply. She knew the battle was far from over. As the salon thrived, so did the resentment from the community's more entrenched members. They muttered about the nerve of Martha and Clara, about how they were trying to change things that shouldn't be changed. One evening, as Martha walked home with Samuel in her arms, she felt eyes watching her. A shadow moved in the corner of her vision, and she quickened her pace. She reached her apartment safely, but the sense of unease lingered. The next morning, Clara found her pacing in the salon. "Martha, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Martha said, though her furrowed brow said otherwise. I wonder how far they'll go." Clara stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You're not alone, Martha." Martha looked at Clara, her resolve returning.
No, I'm not.
And that's why they won't win. Despite the challenges, Martha's salon became more than just a business. It became a symbol of resistance, a place where people of all backgrounds could come together and find common ground. For every person who shunned it, there were two who embraced it. And for every act of hatred, there were countless acts of kindness and solidarity. But the winds of hatred were growing stronger, and Martha knew the fight was far from over. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, casting a golden hue over the busy street. Inside Martha's salon, the hum of life filled the air. The faint whir of a hairdryer blended with laughter and chatter as Clara braided a young girl's hair. Martha stood by the counter, attending to a woman with a toddler on her lap, her face glowing with the pride of a hard day's work. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the street, followed by the sound of angry voices. The room fell silent as everyone turned toward the front door. "Martha," Clara whispered urgently, stepping closer to her. "Something's happening." Before Martha could respond, the door was kicked open, and a group of men and women, their faces twisted with anger and hatred, stormed in. "Get out!" One of them shouted, his voice dripping with venom. "You have no place here, you filthy troublemaker." The customers screamed and scrambled to leave, but the mob blocked their way. A burly man grabbed Clara by the arm and shoved her toward the door. "Leave her alone," Martha cried, rushing to Clara's side. But before she could reach her, someone pushed her back with such force that she stumbled and fell to the ground. "This place is a disease," an older woman sneered, her eyes filled with cold fury. "You've poisoned this town long enough." "Please," Martha pleaded, her voice trembling. "This salon is for everyone. It's meant to bring us together." But her words fell on deaf ears. The mob began tearing through the shop, smashing mirrors, appending chairs, and throwing supplies to the floor. Martha watched in horror as years of hard work were destroyed in mere moments. And then, to her absolute despair, someone struck a match and tossed it onto the pile of debris. Flames erupted instantly, hungrily consuming the wood and fabric.
No.
Martha screamed, struggling to her feet. "Stop, please." The fire spread quickly, licking up the walls and casting an orange glow across the room. Martha stood frozen, her heart breaking as her dreams turned to ashes before her eyes. Clara pulled at her arm. "Martha, we have to go. It's not safe." But Martha couldn't move. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the salon burn. She thought of Samuel, of the life she had built for him, of the hope she had tried to bring to the town. All of it was gone. Just as the flames reached their peak, a strong pair of hands gripped her shoulders and pulled her back. "Martha." A deep voice called, filled with urgency and concern. She turned, her tear-filled eyes meeting the face of a man in a soldier's uniform. It was James, the man who had once promised her a lifetime of love and protection. His face was older now, more weathered, but his eyes still held the same warmth she remembered. "James?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded, gently wiping the tears from her cheeks with his gloved hand. "It's me, Martha."
I'm here.
For a moment, the chaos around her faded. The roaring fire, the jeering mob, even Clara's frantic voice, they all disappeared. All she could see was James, standing there like a pillar of strength.
Why?
"Why are you here?" she managed to ask, her voice cracking. "I heard what happened," James said, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "I came as soon as I could. I'm not letting them take everything from you." He turned to the mob, his commanding presence silencing their jeers. "Enough," he bellowed. "This is not justice, it's cruelty. If any of you have an ounce of decency left, you'll leave now before I make you." The mob hesitated, some shrinking back under his stern gaze. Slowly, they began to disperse, muttering angrily as they retreated into the shadows. When they were gone, James turned back to Martha. The fire was still raging, but he guided her a safe distance away, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Martha," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I failed you once. I won't fail you again." Martha looked up at him, her tears falling freely. "It's all gone, James. Everything I worked for. How will I start again?" He cupped her face in his hands, his touch both firm and gentle. "You'll start the same way you always have, with strength, determination, and heart. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Martha. And this time, you won't have to do it alone." In that moment, despite the ashes of her dreams smoldering behind her, Martha felt a flicker of hope reignite in her heart. James was here. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. The ride back to James' small but tidy home was silent except for the hum of the car engine. Martha sat in the passenger seat, Samuel cradled in her arms, her mind replaying the horrors of the day, the mob, the fire, the ashes of her dreams. But through the haze of grief, she felt James' steady presence beside her, a strange comfort she hadn't expected. When they arrived, James helped her out of the car and led her into the modest bungalow. The living room was simple, furnished with a worn couch and a small table, but it radiated a sense of warmth and care. "Sit," James said gently, motioning to the couch. Martha sat down, adjusting Samuel in her arms. James disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with a cup of tea. "Drink this," he said, handing it to her. "It'll help." She took the cup, her hands trembling slightly. The warmth of the tea spread through her, easing the chill that had settled in her bones. James sat down across from her, his face a mix of determination and vulnerability. "Martha," he began, his voice soft but firm, "I owe you an explanation." She looked at him, her eyes weary but curious. "Why did you leave, James? Why didn't you tell me where you were going?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "When I married you, I knew what kind of world we were living in. A world that would never accept us, no matter how hard we tried. And when you told me you were pregnant, I knew I had to do something." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I had to be strong for you and Samuel," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I couldn't protect you the way I was. I wasn't enough. So I made a decision. I joined the army." Martha's eyes widened. "The army?" He nodded. I thought if I became a soldier, I could gain the strength, the discipline, and the respect we needed to survive in this world. I could build a future for us, one where people couldn't tear us apart so easily. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice tinged with hurt. I didn't want to burden you, he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. You were pregnant, Martha. You had enough to worry about. I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping it from you. Martha looked at him, her heart torn between anger and understanding. Do you have any idea what it was like for me, James? To wake up every day wondering where you were, if you were even alive? He reached across the table, taking her free hand in his. I know I hurt you, Martha, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But everything I did for you and Samuel. I thought I was protecting you. Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Martha let out a shaky breath. I was angry, James. Angry and scared.
But
I understand now. You thought you were doing what was best for us. He looked up at her, hope flickering in his eyes. Can you forgive me? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I forgive you. But James, if we're going to move forward, there can't be any more secrets. We face everything together, no matter how hard it is. He squeezed her hand, his voice resolute.
together.
Always. The weeks that followed were a time of healing and adjustment. James proved himself to be a devoted father, doting on Samuel and helping Martha rebuild her confidence. He encouraged her to dream again, to believe that the loss of her salon wasn't the end of her journey. Martha, though still mourning her losses, found solace in their growing bond. She began to see glimpses of a future she thought she had lost forever. But she couldn't have imagined what was about to happen next. One bright morning, Martha was sitting in the small garden behind James' house, watching Samuel play on a blanket. She had just finished feeding him when she heard a knock at the front door. "I'll get it," James called from inside. Moments later, he appeared in the garden, a puzzled look on his face. "Martha, you better come inside. There's something you need to see." Curious and slightly apprehensive, Martha stood and followed him. When she stepped into the living room, she froze. Standing there were several of her former customers, black, white, and mixed race, all holding packages and envelopes. "What's going on?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. One of the women, Abigail's mother, stepped forward. "Martha, we know what happened to your salon, and we know what it meant to you, to this town. You didn't just style hair, you brought people together. You gave us hope." Another woman, a white farmer's wife, nodded. "We couldn't just sit by and do nothing. So, we all pitched in." One by one, they began placing the packages and envelopes on the table. Martha opened them with trembling hands. Inside were donations, money, supplies, tools, all meant to help her rebuild her salon. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the people gathered before her. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Abigail's mother said with a smile. "Just promise us you'll keep being the beacon of hope this town needs." Martha turned to James, who stood behind her with a proud smile. "Did you know about this?" He shook his head. "Not a clue. But it looks like they see what I've always seen in you." Martha looked back at the group, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you all so much. I promise I'll make this work. Not just for me, but for all of us." That day, Martha realized that her dream had never truly been lost. It had simply been waiting for a new beginning. And with the support of her community and the love of the man who had come back to her, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The months that followed marked a profound transformation in the town. Martha's new salon, painted in warm tones and named Harmony Haven, became more than just a business. It became a symbol of hope and reconciliation. Slowly but surely, people began to see beyond the barriers of race, realizing the strength in unity and the richness that diversity brought to their lives. One crisp morning, Martha swept the salon floor as the bell over the door jingled. She looked up to see Mrs. Henderson, the widow who had once openly shunned her, step inside. Her expression was hesitant but softened by something that looked like regret. "Mrs. Henderson," Martha said, masking her surprise. Good morning. What can I do for you? The older woman clutched her handbag nervously. I was wondering if you could fit me in for a wash and trim. Martha's smile was warm but cautious. Of course. Please have a seat. As she worked, Mrs. Henderson broke the silence. I owe you an apology, Martha. I've been wrong about a lot of things. About you, about others like you. Martha paused, meeting the woman's gaze in the mirror. It takes courage to admit that, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you. When the haircut was done, Mrs. Henderson looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes welling with tears. You've got a gift, Martha. Not just with hair, but with people. You've changed this town more than you'll ever know. Martha blinked back her own tears as she hugged Samuel, who had toddled into the room. We're all just trying to find a way to live together, Mrs. Henderson. One step at a time. Word of the changes in the town began to spread to neighboring communities. People traveled from miles away to visit Harmony Haven, drawn by the stories of how it was bridging divides and fostering understanding. The salon became a hub for conversations, for laughter, and even for reconciliation between those who had once been at odds. On weekends, families of all races gathered at the park next to the salon, sharing picnics and stories. It was there that James often stood by Martha's side, Samuel perched on his shoulders, both of them glowing with pride. Clara remained a constant presence, her laugh as infectious as ever. She became more than just an assistant, she became family. Together, they worked to ensure that the message of unity and hope extended far beyond the salon walls. One Sunday afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, the townsfolk gathered for a community barbecue in the park. Martha sat at a picnic table, watching as Samuel played with other children. James stood nearby, chatting with some of the men, his once guarded demeanor replaced with a confidence born of purpose and belonging. Clara joined Martha, balancing a plate of food on her lap. Look at this, she said, gesturing to the crowd. Can you believe it? A year ago, this town was a mess of hate and division.
And now?
Martha smiled, her heart swelling with pride. And now it feels like home. Clara nudged her playfully. Don't get all emotional on me. You'll have me crying into my coleslaw. They both laughed, a sound that seemed to echo the joy and resilience of the entire community. As the years passed, Martha's impact only grew. Harmony Haven became a landmark, a place where people from all walks of life felt welcome. The lessons learned in this small town spread like ripples in a pond, reaching other towns, and inspiring change in communities far and wide. And at the heart of it all was Martha, surrounded by her family, her friends, and a town that had once shunned her but now adorned her. She had faced hatred and adversity, but she had also found love, forgiveness, and the courage to build a brighter future. One evening, as she stood on the porch of her home with James by her side and Samuel playing in the yard, she looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. For her family, for her friends, for the town that had finally embraced change, and for the hope that the future would only continue to shine brighter.